Good morning. I will now take leaders' questions under Standing Order 27, and I call on Deputy Billy Kelleher.
Good morning.
2 minutes.
Minister, last week the government announced with great fanfare, and they will claim rightly and justifiably, a deal on the promissory notes. Over the weekend we obviously saw a certain amount of spinning to take credit for it, how he said he would threaten and intimidate the Governor of the Central Bank to make sure the deal came through on time. There was banging of fists on tables. But the most important issue was that this deal in general was welcomed by the vast majority of the people in this House and by the vast majority of the people outside this House. And they also claimed that what was now necessary was that there would be a social dividend arising from that deal on the promissory notes. And then we see the publication, we then see the publication of the Finance Local Property Tax Amendment Bill. And Minister, the difficulty here is that this tax is inherently unfair. It doesn't take into account ability to pay. It doesn't take into account ability to pay. It doesn't take into account the recommendations on the Commission on Taxation with regard to certain cohorts.
Deputy. This is leaders' questions now. Please, just Deputy Kelleher, and we'll hear the. Okay, please.
Thank you, Lascombe Corla. The fact of the matter is that this property tax is inherently unfair and it is unjust, and it doesn't take into account. Deputy Stagg, you obviously didn't read the manifestos, because in your manifesto you didn't propose this either. I'm sorry you didn't. But he certainly didn't read the Memorandum of Understanding either, may I say, Deputy Stagg, because in that was a site valuation tax, which is a very different thing altogether. So let's be clear. The reason I raise this, Minister, is because there is huge concern out there. There's huge concern in the backbenches of Labour and in the backbenches of Fine Gael as well. Quite clearly, this tax is seen as the wrong tax at the wrong time. Families are under huge stress.
Deputies, please calm down, please. Just conclude, Deputy, your overtime.
Well, last Councillor, in fairness, I think there's been more heckling than allowed for me to contribute. I would just like to make a few valid points if people opposite could listen. At this present time, the CSO has published figures which shows quite clearly that disposable income has fallen for a 4th year in a row. It now is outlining that people simply cannot afford the basics in terms of heating, gas, oil.
Deputy Kelleher.
Thank you very much. Thank you. When you have Eric on your side, Deputy, you know you're in trouble.
Deputy, please proceed.
Can I just make 3 points? Minister, why did you not, and why did your government not take into account the recommendations on the Commission on Taxation with regard to people who purchased homes at the height of the boom and paid excessive amounts of stamp duty?
Okay.
That is one critical issue. Why didn't she take into account inability to pay at this particular time when families are under huge pressure out there, and the figures correlate that? And they are the 2 key issues, Minister, that people want to know. And thirdly, would it not be now appropriate for at least to give some form of social dividend in view of the deal on the promissory notes that would address a generation of people that are finding it very difficult in terms of Middle Ireland, and particularly in Dublin, as your backbenchers are saying, those ones over there, and as Fine Gael backbenchers are saying daily on the radio and to their constituents?
Minister, quiet please.
The deputies raised quite a variety of issues. Can I say that last week the official spokesperson of the deputy's party, Deputy McGrath, was quite gracious in acknowledging the deal done and the impact it has for our country as we, as a government, work to fix the terrible damage inflicted upon our country by our predecessor government. I think it is a significant achievement last week, despite the fact that the leader of Fianna Fáil told the House in February that the idea that we can unilaterally renegotiate the programme is wrong, he said. And he told the leader of the Labour Party at the time to stop pretending that you can dictate to the ECB and everybody else. At the same time, the spokesperson of Sinn Féin The spokesperson of Sinn Féin at the time, Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald, on the 26th of September, she told the House, "It's clear the government's so-called negotiating strategy on banking debt is in tatters," she said. Now, despite all that was said by any observation from any unbiased person, the best possible deal for this country was achieved last week. But it is only one step in the path of recovery that we must do. And I want to agree with the Deputy that there must be a social dividend from the incremental progress we're making, because, in truth, the Irish people have taken an enormous burden, and it's to them the vast bulk of the credit for the steady progress on the road to recovery that we've achieved is due, and I acknowledge that. In relation to the specific point the Deputy makes in relation to the property tax, as you know, property tax was part of the commitments solemnly signed into by the predecessor government, of which the Deputy opposite was part, written down, to be delivered, and the detail in terms of the structure of that will be discussed in minute detail when the legislative provisions are brought to the House in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Kelleher, one further minute.
Thanks, Leslie Cora. Minister, I've no problem graciously acknowledging the fact that a deal was done last week in terms of the promissory notes. In fact, you probably got more acknowledgement from Fianna Fáil than you did from some of your backbenchers who are still unhappy at the fact that the debt has been socialised onto the sovereign. But the point I'm making here, Minister, is if you are saying, as the leader said, that Labour couldn't dictate to Frankfurt, well, he certainly couldn't dictate to Frankfurt because he got no debt write-down, as was the case stated by Deputy Gilmore when he was in opposition, when he said it was Labour's way or Frankfurt's way. Now, clearly, it was an achievement, but for Labour to pretend that they put the gun to Mario Draghi's head and said they'd pull the trigger is an absolute bluff. There's an agreement that's there. It will benefit people, but it will only benefit people, Minister, if this government decides that a social dividend is required to show that this deal is meaningful and will have an impact on people's lives. Now, many families are out there in huge distress at this present time, and they didn't support the parties opposite for cuts to child benefit. They didn't support the parties opposite for increases in PRSI. They didn't support the parties that are now in government to see a property tax foisted on them, when they just have no ability to pay everyday household bills. And this is more predominantly the case in Dublin and other commuter belt areas throughout this country.
Thank you, Deputy.
Now, what I'm saying, Minister,
Please, would you calm down? Deputy, just to conclude, your overtime notice.
When Deputy Keating is heckling me, I really do think I'm making progress. All I'm saying is that in the terms of ability to pay, Minister, this issue has to be clearly looked at. There has been some fraying around the edges, but the vast majority of people here will be obligated to pay a property tax, whether or not they can afford it and whether or not they can actually put food on the table, oil in the tank, or in Middle Ireland, people who are trying their best in terms of health insurance and other costs that the state does not pay.
Thank you. Minister, please, Minister to reply, please.
The critique of the economic strategy of this government from the beginning, the critique from Fianna Fáil was denial that they brought this country to the brink of economic ruin. They left.
Please, have respect for the...
You were a member of the government. You were a member of the government. The worst government in the history of this state that wrecked our economy. The very least, all the finger pointing.
Deputy Healy. Please.
All the finger.
I want order, please. Sorry, I don't want. Look, you can have this. You can do this elsewhere, I'm sure. Minister, to conclude. No more interruptions.
All of Deputy Kelleher's finger pointing, all his shouting, cannot deny that fact that a short 2 years ago, a new government came in to pick up the pieces of a broken economy, and we're well on the way, step by incremental step, with the help of the Irish people, to fix the destruction that you left behind in your wake. So let me deal with the particular issue you've raised. We do need to broaden the tax base, because you left a situation where we couldn't pay for day-to-day expenses, and we're borrowing at the rate of over £1 billion a month, and we still are. 30% of our tax base collapsed because you'd shrunk it in such a way. We need to broaden the tax base. Part of that is to have a property-based tax that is analogous to every other developed country that I've looked at across the world. The detail of the property tax will be brought through step. You can shout down all you like then. Step by step it will be debated in this House, and it will be done in as fair a way as we can in the circumstances that you left this country.
Could I just ask for order, please? Deputy Cowan, could I just ask for order and respect for the person who was asking the question and for the reply? Deputy.
Thank you, Lascan Corla. Minister, the leaking of the draft report of the inquiry team into the death of Savita Halappanavar before her husband Praveen had sight of it was, I think you'll agree, an act of gross insensitivity to the family. It seems from what we read in the press that the report vindicates what Praveen has been saying all along. It seems to indicate that little attention was paid to the risk of infection, and that there was a failure to intervene even when it was clear that miscarriage was inevitable. I think it's fair to say that the Halappanavar family, and Praveen in particular, has been treated disgracefully and appallingly throughout this entire process. Savita died on the 28th of October in Galway University Hospital from suspected septicemia. But it wasn't until her husband went public on the 14th of November that really there was any response from the institutions of state. He said on the public record that he had received no contact from the HSE in those intervening weeks. And only when 3 doctors had to be removed from the inquiry team did Minister for Health James Riley eventually and finally meet with Mr. Halappanavar. So, Minister, can you just tell us today who is in charge of this issue? Who's responsible within the system for liaising with Praveen and with the family of Savita Halappanavar? Is Minister Riley responsible for this? Are you satisfied with the handling of the issue? And tell us, Minister, will Praveen now be given a copy of the draft report? And when will he be given it?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Extracts, as the Deputy has said, of the draft HSE report into the tragic death of Mrs. Savita Halappanavar in University College Hospital, Galway, last October, were published in national newspapers yesterday and today, and commented upon in the media, and indeed commented upon now again. I think all our focus should be on the renewed distress that the family of the late Savita Halappanavar, and particularly her husband, the pain must be unendurable in relation to having to revisit all these matters. The report has not been seen by the Minister for Health or officials in the Department of Health. The leak, I entirely agree, is disturbing. It is unacceptable, and the Minister has conveyed his personal concerns to Praveen Halappanavar in relation to that matter. Minister Riley has made it clear that he's awaiting the final report of the independent assessor, and has reaffirmed his commitment to give Praveen Halappanavar the final HSE report as soon as it comes into his possession. Now, the normal procedure for people who are referenced in a report of this kind is that they're given the draft so that they have an opportunity in natural justice to comment on it before it is finalised. I understand that's what has happened. And somewhere along that chain of distribution, where people were asked to look at the contents of a draft, it leaked into the public domain. I think that is shameful, it is unacceptable, and it is hurtful. And I can reiterate again the determination of the government and certainly of the Minister for Health to get the full and complete circumstances surrounding this tragic death, and the first person, once the report is finalised, to be given it in advance of any publication will be Mr. Halappanavar.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Mayor McDonald, 1 minute.
Thank you, Minister. And I understand that Mr. Halappanavar and his legal representative expected to have a copy of this report last week. So I can't understand why that didn't happen, and it has been subsequently leaked. I can only guess as to the motivations of those that leaked the report. None of us can conclude on that here. But what we do know is that the distress that this family is now experiencing is just one episode in chapter after chapter of distress visited on them, not alone by the loss of a wife and a daughter, but by the absolute ineptitude and insensitivity of the system in dealing with this matter. So, Minister, what does all of this, when we consider it, say to women? What does it say? We're generations before we can deal with the issue of the Magdalen laundries. We're decades now still waiting for legislation on the X case, legislation that everybody in this House knows is necessary, not to create some sort of liberal abortion regime, but to make sure that pregnant women are safe. That if a pregnant woman's life is in danger, that medics or administrators do not have the option of looking the other way.
Thank you.
And from what has been leaked, it appears, and it is partial information, that that is what happened in the case of Savita, and her husband has said that on the record consistently. He should, Minister, immediately have a copy of that report. It's not sustainable for you to say that you will withhold it until Minister Riley sees it. Staff in the HSE have it, people in the media have it. The very person who must absolutely have it as a matter of urgency is Praveen Halappanavar. So I would wish you, when you take to your seat, Minister, to say now, to give reassurance to women in particular who are looking at the health system and the antics of the HSE and wondering what on earth is going on, but more particularly for Praveen himself. Say now today, Minister Howlin, that he will have an immediate copy of that report.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, final reply on this issue.
This is an issue of unimaginable pain for the Halappanavar family, particularly for Praveen. It's not an issue that I intend to make any political dispute about in this House. We need to get the full facts. We need to get the full facts into the public domain as soon as it is received by the Minister for Health. I've indicated to you that the Minister for Health has not got a copy of the draft report yet, because the normal, in natural justice, in constitutional justice process is that those who are commented upon in a draft report have sight of it in case there are issues that they want to rebut or comment upon. Once the report is finalised, in advance of any publication, and this should not, in draft form or in any form, either be in the public domain and, with all due respect, be commented upon until we see the complete report by anybody. Too often in the past, in so many issues, people come to conclusions. Let's give the space and the time to the expert panel that are there to put all the facts after due process, after those who have constitutional rights as well to be consulted. That's put into the public domain. And then let's have a full debate about the matters here and draw conclusions. The Deputy goes further and talks about other matters. She referenced the Magdalen laundries. This is the first government in generations who have given a standing and a recognition of the terrible wrong done to those women. You mentioned the X case. This is the first government in 20 years who is determined to legislate on this issue. So it ill behoves people who have been in this House for a while, or as parties have been represented, to critique a proactive government who is actually going to deal with these issues of long standing that have adversely affected women down the generation.
I now call on Deputy Matthew McGrath. 2 minutes for your...
That's Count Corler. Minister, I rise to my feet today in the knowledge that thousands upon thousands of families and homeowners, many of whom are in extreme negative equity and indeed in perilous situations, and grappling with intolerable levels of personal debt, especially those on home mortgages. And after watching your government's gleeful and your backbenchers' gleeful acceptance and acclamation of a wonderful deal last week, which I certainly didn't think was wonderful or support, and so-called friends in the ECB and the way they treated us, these people are simply left confused and further dismayed. This body of people, hard-pressed taxpayers, were waiting in anxious anticipation for the publication of the Local Property Tax Amendment Bill 2013, published yesterday, for some sort of relief from your government. But alas, they were to be bitterly disappointed once again. Not a very nice Valentine's present for these families. No such deal for these families, or indeed any sort of relief for those hard-pressed taxpayers. No extension of time to pay back their loans, and indeed not for these people, but you have for the bondholders, and indeed you have for the unsecured bondholders, but no such thing as social equity for these families. Minister, this property tax is clearly a tax on debt. What about the families who have paid massive stamp duty at the time of the purchase of their dream homes? And while it was called stamp duty, everybody knows and believes that it was treated by governments, indeed, and understood by the population in general, that it was a property tax. And that's accepted. It was front-loaded, and most people who had to pay it had to borrow to pay it. And they'll be paying that for the next 20, 25 years, and indeed to 2038. Like you said, we're paying back the bondholders' money, and we get such a good deal on it. As far as I'm concerned, this bill is simply unbelievable. While I welcome, of course, the meagre waivers to those who suffer from disabilities or homes damaged by pyrite, or indeed the social aspects of it, I want to ask you, Minister, will your government reconsider extending the paltry number of exemptions and these categories, and will you accept amendments here? You have said it's going to be discussed in detail. Will you accept amendments here, and a very important amendment, to give these people some much-needed relief, because I believe it's vital.
Thank you, Deputy.
And as far as the pensioners are concerned, pensioners especially, and you're dealing with them in the Cork agreement, but pensioners with small and diminishing incomes are left desperate in the situation. Of course, they're told they can get a deferral, but it costs them 4%. I think little more than what you said the deal last week was going to cost, so that's not very fair. And many of those make it worse at paying the mortgages back to people like the EBS, who refuse, Minister, to pass on any kind of a paltry decrease in rates to their customers. And I want to ask you, Minister, will you call in Mr Honohan and indeed the regulator and ask them to insist on that these institutions pass on whatever bit of relief we get from Europe and from the European Central Bank and from the general lenders. So I ask your government to accept amendments, Taoiseach.
Minister.
There's a couple of separate issues raised by the Deputy. Firstly, in relation to the prom note, you seem to acknowledge that there was very significant savings to the state, and you're asking it to be applied in a certain way. At the same time, you decry the actual arrangement made. You see, the Deputy knows full well that his view is simply that we should default, walk away from it, as if that had no consequence for the very vulnerable people that we have. The Deputy knows full well that that would be chaotic. And you look at countries that have defaulted in the past, 20 years later are still enduring the consequences of that. But that wasn't the path we've chosen. We've negotiated, by any standards, a very fine deal for the Irish people. I objected, and my party did, the time that that bad debt was nationalised, but that was nationalised by the previous administration by a vote in this House that you have acknowledged yourself that you voted for and that you regret. But that is water under the bridge. That awful decision was made, and we have to live with the consequences of that. And we have mitigated that to a very large extent last week. To deal with the second point, by the way, you mentioned unsecured. You mentioned unsecured. You mentioned.
We have the Minister.
I won't be distracted by people trying to rewrite history. But let me say this: in terms of the unsecured bondholders, I think. Are you the Is it a sort of a joint leadership of McGrath's now, is it?
No, sir.
Is it every McGrath has a question? Let me answer the question. Let me answer the question in relation to the unsecured bondholders. The Deputy mightn't be aware, doesn't read into it all that well, that we have already burned unsecured bondholders to the tune of €15 billion. Unsubordinated debt. €15 billion. In relation to the property tax, I've already answered the question previously that we need, in order to sustain the very services that Deputy McGrath argues for, health, social welfare, education, every day of the week, we need to have a broad tax base to pay for that. But you see, the Deputy is very big on the demand to spend, but never supports any mechanism to raise revenue. So let me say this. Broadening the tax base, as envisaged by the property tax, will have an income stream, significant income stream into the public coffers. It will sustain and allow local government to thrive into the future. And in terms of the detail of exemptions or amendments, all of those will be tabled and thrashed out in detail on the floor in coming days and weeks.
No, Deputy Matthew McGrath, further.
I'm disappointed with the reply. I suppose I couldn't have expected much better. We did hear all the righteous indignation from that side of the House that burned the bondholders. He's telling us now that 15 billion was burnt already. I certainly, as I said, and I've acknowledged that it was a mistake, and I voted for the bank guarantee. But you have done it a number of occasions since you came in here into government, even though you're protesting what happened. I want to ask you, please, the question I'm asking is about property tax, home tax. And the Taoiseach said before the election that tax on the home was unfair and unjust. And that's what I'm asking you. And your party campaigned for years and anti-home taxes. And now you're in government, you do the exact opposite. So the people are confused and disappointed. I want to also ask you about the snitch clause that you have put into this bill. The snitch clause. Do you want us to become informers on each other when somebody sells a home or whatever? And while we did discuss last week about supporting the Gardaí, certainly, but not. Normally when we sell something on, we give a good look penny. But you want a snitch clause, Minister. That's what your government are doing now. And the revenue commissioners are getting exorbitant powers here to interfere in people's homes and their home issues and their home finances. And that is not fair. They pay their tax at source or self-assessment or whatever. But revenue have no business in this situation at all, as far as I'm concerned. And it's a snitch clause which I dislike. I think the vast majority of people won't partake in and don't like even the connotations that it brings up.
Thank you,
so, Taoiseach, Minister, I'm very disappointed with your answer. I'm very disappointed. I'm asking you again, will you accept an amendment or amendments in relation to these hard-pressed homeowners who are in negative equity and struggling to pay their mortgages, because they are the people in need. They are the people that voted for you en masse, and they are the people left bewildered and confused and severely dejected by you.
Thank you, Deputy.
I'm disappointed that the Deputy is disappointed, because I genuinely accept the Deputy's Pauline conversion. I genuinely accept that you have renounced the sins of the past. I genuinely accept that your association and your support of and your votes to sustain the last disastrous government are all something you'd like to put behind you and make amends. I accept that. And I think that's an honourable and good position. But let me say, in relation to the specifics you've asked, there will be a full debate on the property tax bill. I'd like to see the amendments, if you don't mind, before you agree to actually accept them. The Minister for Finance will be taking the bill. Let's look at the amendments that he's tabling. Let's look at the amendments you table, and I'm sure you're going to have a very good debate. But that's how the system works, Lascian Corla. In relation to the particular point you make on the so-called, you characterise it the snitch clause, the position is that as part of the sales process, a seller must supply the purchaser with the value of the property for local tax purposes. Now, isn't that a reasonable position? If the seller does not supply this information, then the seller will tell what he has declared for local property tax purposes. If it is different from the asking price, that will be known. And I think that's a very open and a transparent and a reasonable position. But I'm sure you can debate all that with the Minister for Finance next week.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes Leaders' questions.